Good evening. I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Monday, July 25th. Tonight, we begin with a historic apology on Canadian land by the leader of the Catholic Church for its role in the residential school system. Pope Francis says he is in Canada to express his sorrow and ask for forgiveness. He delivered his apology in Spanish at Bear Park in Masquatchees, Alberta this morning. The pontiff says the forced assimilation of Indigenous peoples destroyed their cultures, severed their families, and marginalized generations in ways still being felt today. He says the memories of the children who never returned from residential schools has left him with a sense of sorrow, indignation, and shame. On the West Coast, homicide investigators have been called to Langley, BC, just east of Vancouver. RCMP in that community confirm they are dealing with shootings that have left 2 people dead, 1 in critical condition and another with serious injuries. Mounties also said a suspect had been identified by police, but he had been shot during an interaction and died at the scene. The investigation is still ongoing. Hockey Canada has released a plan to combat the toxic culture in the sport. This comes a day before the start of a second round of parliamentary hearings, which are looking into the organization's handling of sexual assault complaints. The plan includes the implementation by the end of September of a centralized tracking and reporting system for abuse complaints. Hockey Canada also says it will implement enhanced screening for high-performance players, and it will mandate that breaching the organization's code of conduct or refusing to participate in investigations could result in a lifetime ban. After allegations of political meddling in the case of the Nova Scotia mass shooting, the House of Commons Public Safety Committee met today. They are beginning a probe into whether the federal government interfered with the RCMP's investigation of the shooting in April of 2020. At issue is RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucky's meeting with the province's top officers. This was where it is alleged that she mentioned promising Ottawa to release information about the weapons the gunmen used. Then Public Safety Minister Bill Blair and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau flatly deny any political interference. And Commissioner Lucky has repeatedly said she did not feel any pressure from federal officials. All right, turning to Canada's airline industry now, where WestJet's takeover of Sunwing Airlines is facing some pushback from a union. Unifor wants Ottawa to block the deal due to concerns it will lead to more subcontracted work with lower wages and precarious conditions. It wants the federal government to approve the takeover only if WestJet guarantees it will create jobs and invest in workers. The union says it's concerned by WestJet's talk of crew optimization and improved efficiencies in operating costs. However, WestJet says it will protect and create jobs. Well, meanwhile, anyone with a ticket to fly to or from Calgary or Vancouver on WestJet can breathe a sigh of relief. This comes after news that 800 baggage and customer service workers will not be going on strike. Unifor has reached a tentative deal with the airline for its members who work at those 2 airports. The tentative deal will be presented to union members later this week. To the east, little children on Prince Edward Island and Quebec are now eligible for Moderna's Spikevax COVID-19 vaccine. It is being administered to kids between 6 months and 5 years old starting today. Quebec received more than 70,000 doses of the 2-dose vaccine last week. Moving to southern Ontario, where thousands were without power after a severe thunderstorm swept through much of the region last night. Hydro One's online outage map showed nearly 40,000 customers without power just after midnight, but that number did fall to just under 7,000 by late this morning. Environment Canada had issued severe thunderstorm watches for southern Ontario yesterday. It stated the storms could bring torrential rain, damaging wind gusts and strong hail, but those watches have since been lifted. All of this comes as heat waves are baking North America, including different parts of Canada, with heat warnings in effect from BC to Atlantic Canada. Climate activists are warning record-setting high temperatures and dangerous droughts could become the norm if things don't change. Golf star Brooke Henderson became Canada's first 2-time major champion yesterday. Ms. Henderson won the Evian Championship, rolling in an 8-foot birdie putt on the 18th hole to take a one-stroke victory over LPGA rookie Sophia Schubert. Ms. Henderson had also won the Women's PGA Championship in 2016. The 24-year-old now has 12 career wins on the LPGA Tour. After the break, we're going to take a deeper look at the Pope's apology for the Catholic Church's role in the residential school system with Mr. Bruce Allan from IRSSS. Stay with us. We'll have that interview and more news from around the world shortly after the break. Thousands of survivors, elders, and their family members gathered on the site of a former residential school in Alberta on Monday. This is where the leader of the Catholic Church delivered a long-awaited apology on Canadian land for the role the Roman Catholic Church played in residential schools. He delivered the address while visiting the site of the former Ermineskin Indian Residential School. Indigenous leaders say an apology is a start to working toward healing a past that won't be erased. Well, joining us now to share his perspective is Mr. Bruce Allan, Resolution Health Support Worker at the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. Mr. Allan, thank you again for joining us. I know you're returning from the papal apology at Masquachese, Alberta. We really appreciate your time today. So let's start with your thoughts on this apology itself, Mr. Allan. What do you think about it? Was it missing anything, or do you think the Pope covered the entire role the Catholic Church played in the residential school system?
I think he did cover a lot of the grounds. It was well scripted. Yeah, he covered all the bases, but I think when we talk to survivors, they want to see action that should follow. So for myself, I think this apology is not overdue. Elders and many people have been waiting for many years. My dad never got to see the apology. He went through the residential system. Didn't survive it. So, I'm thinking of all those people that I know, others that I know. It'd be nice to have them hear it. Not longer than that. So it's long overdue. He said, start. And we'll see what comes from it in the next few months, years probably.
There's a lot to keep our eyes out for. Now, as you said, there still needs to be action that needs to be taken. And a lot of Indigenous people, or Indigenous leaders rather, are saying that this is just a start. So what kind of steps or what kind of path should the Catholic Church take in particular in terms of reconciliation?
Well, I think they need to open up their vaults that has all of the information. They've always withheld a lot of the documents and records, things like that. So I think they really need to be open about it. And restitution, I think the Catholic bishops promised some compensation for survivors, but I think it's going to take a lot more than just survivors. I mean, compensation. We need to do healing on both sides with the church in itself, and they can do that by taking responsibility and being accountable for you can say centuries with Indigenous peoples in Canada.
Now, considering that you yourself attended a residential school, Lee Jack Residential School, and you're an intergenerational survivor through your grandmother and through your father, the Pope here is asking for forgiveness in the Church's role of the residential school system. So from your own perspective, do you forgive the Church for its role in the residential school system, Mr. Allan?
It would take a lot, It'll take more than the apology to get to that place of forgiveness. I know forgiveness is really important, and it does release the forgiver of what has gone on. And I don't think I'm ready to do that yet. We still have a lot of ways to go.
We've got a long road
So,
ahead towards reconciliation, and well, unfortunately, we are running out of time, Mr. Allan, but we need to continue this conversation on Forum Daily. Mr. Allan, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll hopefully get you back on the show very soon.
thank you.
All right, Forum Daily will be back after a short break. We'll have more on the Bank of Canada's recent decision to raise the key interest rate by a full percentage point. We'll be speaking with Dr. Stephen Williamson, a monetary policy expert and professor at the University of Western Ontario. And of course, we'll have more news from around the world after that. This comes as Russia says it aims to topple Ukraine's government, and Pakistan's monsoon rain death toll passes 300. We'll have more on these stories and more news coming up next. Soaring prices in Canada have sparked comparisons between the current 8.1% inflation rate and the challenging high inflation of the 1970s and 80s. Canada suffered through years of high inflation after global events in the 1970s caused a surge in food and energy prices. Looking back, economists say the central bank was slow to raise interest rates back then, leading the economy into an eventual recession. Western University professor Dr. Stephen Williamson says the bank learned from that experience and recently raised its key interest rate by a full percentage point, which now sits at 2.5%. Well, joining us now to unpack this very comment is Dr. Williamson himself, a monetary policy expert and professor at the University of Western Ontario. Dr. Williamson, welcome to Forum Daily.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So firstly, sir, can you unpack why the Bank of Canada raised its key interest rate by a full percentage point?
Well, the bank has an agreement with the federal government that it's had since 1991 to target inflation at 2%. And beginning last year, I mean, the inflation was above target. The bank's story back then was that that would be likely to be temporary, but now we have inflation, above 8%, and the bank's well behind the behind the curve now. And what they would like to do is make up for some lost ground. So that's why we have these unprecedentedly large interest rate increases. Very high rate of inflation, and they've been a little slow getting at it.
And we mentioned the high inflation of the 70s and 80s. So what sorts of mistakes did the central bank learn from back then?
Well, back then, it might be surprising to some people, but in the 1970s, it wasn't well recognized that inflation control was the job of the central bank. So we had an episode of like wage and price controls in Canada with the Anti-Inflation Board, and which didn't work very well, and ultimately we arrived at where the kind of a working relationship we have now between the federal government and the Bank of Canada, which involves inflation targeting. Canada was one of the first countries to start doing that, and that was a big success for 30 years until last year.
All right, well, bringing this back to our viewers, Doctor, how is this rising interest rate likely to impact Canadians amid already rising inflation?
Well, the story here is that increases in interest rates they cut both ways. So they're bad for borrowers. You'll face a higher interest rate when you renew your mortgage or if you borrow to buy a car, but interest rates will be higher for savers. So this is like bad for younger people who borrow, and good for retired people who are interested in a safe rate of return.
All right, well, about 2 minutes left here, but there's been a lot of commentary about what the central bank should or should not be doing in terms of fighting inflation. But is there a simple solution to high inflation, Doctor?
Oh, there's never a simple solution. So part of this is a matter of the bank being agile and watching the data and responding to it. So it could well be that inflation goes away on its own, but maybe not. And then the bank has to make judgments about how fast to increase rates and how high to go. But it's not a perfect science by any stretch of the imagination.
And do you expect any further rate hikes from the Bank of Canada?
Well, given current situation, yes. But again, it all depends how things unfold. There's some glimmer of hope here now because some commodity prices have beginning to come down. Have begun to come down, like price of oil, for instance. We the bank has to sit and wait and watch and see what happens, and it could be you're going to see more. Yeah.
Sounds like a lot to keep our eyes on. Dr. Williamson, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Okay, thank you.
Stay with us. Up next, we've got news from around the world, of course. Gazprom is cutting back natural gas exports to Europe. Myanmar's military-led government executes 4 political prisoners, and Zimbabwe introduces gold coins to fight inflation. We'll have more on these stories and others like them from around the world after the break, so stay tuned to Forum Daily. We'll be right back with more news shortly. Russia's top diplomat says Moscow's overarching goal in Ukraine is to free its people from what the Kremlin considers an unacceptable regime. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's statement is the bluntest expression yet of Russia's war aims. Mr. Lavrov told an Arab League summit in Cairo that the government of President Volodymyr Zelensky is, quote, absolutely anti-people and anti-historical. The remarks come as Ukraine attempts to resume grain exports from its Black Sea ports. This comes under an agreement that was tested over the weekend by a Russian strike on Odessa. Meanwhile, Russia's Gazprom will cut natural gas flows through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to Europe to 20% of capacity starting Wednesday. Today's deliveries were at 40% of full capacity when the pipeline reopened after 10 days of scheduled maintenance last week. Gazprom is citing equipment repairs for its decision to make further cuts, which the German government is rejecting. Moving to Myanmar, which has carried out its first executions in nearly 50 years. The country hanged a former lawmaker, a democracy activist, and 2 other political prisoners. They had been accused of a targeted killing after the country's military takeover last year. The executions announced Monday were carried out despite worldwide pleas for clemency for the 4 men. State media said the 4 planned and directed as well as organized terrorist killings. Opposition figures and rights activists say their convictions were politically motivated and condemned the executions. All right, turning to recent comments by Algeria's foreign minister, who says Syria's decade-long suspension from the Arab League is undermining cooperation in the group. His remarks during a visit to Damascus on Monday indicated support for Syria to be allowed to rejoin the organization under President Bashar Assad. The Arab League expelled Syria from the organization in 2011 as Syria's conflict broke out. Syria's civil war has killed hundreds of thousands of people, displaced half the country's population, and left large parts of Syria destroyed. In Pakistan, authorities say the death toll from more than 5 weeks of monsoon rains and flash flooding across the country has surpassed 300. While much of Pakistan struggles with the annual monsoons, drawing criticism about poor government planning, there is still some benefit to the heavy rains. They are relied on for irrigating crops and replenishing dams and other water reservoirs. The season runs from July through September. Moving to the UK now, where 3 British Court of Appeal judges had a tough ruling to make in regards to a 12-year-old boy's access to life support. They have ruled that the parents of the boy, left in a comatose state after suffering catastrophic brain damage, cannot stop doctors from ending life support for him. Archie Battersby was found unconscious at home on April 7th. His mother believes he may have been taking part in an online challenge. Doctors believe he is brain dead and say continued life support is not in his best interests. His mother, however, thinks Archie has twice tried to breathe on his own in the past few days. Switching gears to recent moves by Zimbabwe, which has launched gold coins to be sold to the public. This in a bid to tame runaway inflation that has further eroded the country's unstable currency. The unprecedented move was announced today by the country's central bank, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, to boost confidence in the local currency. Trust in Zimbabwe's currency is so low after people saw their savings wiped out by hyperinflation in 2008 that many retailers don't accept it. Well, it turns out many millennials don't stray very far from where they grew up. A study by Harvard University and U.S. Census Bureau researchers finds that by the age of 26, more than 2/3 of American millennials lived in the same area where they grew up. 80% had moved less than 160 kilometers away, and 90% moved less than 800 kilometers away. White and Hispanic millennials were more likely to move to another place to earn more money than young Black people. The 2023 Eurovision Song Contest will be staged in Britain, not in Ukraine. This even though Ukraine won the right to host the music competition when the Cluj Orchestra won this year's contest. Organizers have decided it is too risky to hold the extravaganza in Ukraine, but British officials say the 2023 event will be a celebration of Ukrainian culture and creativity. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all of our commentary, programming, and interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thanks for joining us today on Forum Daily News, and we'll see you again next time. Take care, Canada.